Welcome to episode 58 of the Hard Truth About B2B eCommerce. I'm your co-host, Isaiah Bollinger, and I'm here with Tim.
Hey, everybody, Timothy Peterson. Welcome to 58. I'm glad we're this far along in the podcast. And I usually say this to Isaiah and our guests at the beginning in recent episodes. I've heard from other people yet again who claim to have listened to either most or all of our podcasts. And that's remarkable. And, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you and, keep spreading the word.
Can we get like a guest shout out? Like, who are these guests?
Actually, you know what? I'm gonna pull their names for the next time. I'll do that.
Okay.
You can mention a few of these people. So they're only
we can tag them in social media, make them feel like we're paying attention. We're paying attention.
Of course, I think it's the way to do it. I do know Mark Friedman. I should mention Mark Friedman is one of the folks who also has a podcast called the Marketing Playbook. He says that he has listened to every one of our episodes when he's gone running or doing other things. So I'm very happy to mention him. Shout out to Mark Friedman, but I'll mention other names as we go ahead as well. Really good for him. Let me give two quick shout outs to our sponsors. We are very happy to mention Punch Out To Go, a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. Punch Out To Go's iPass technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. With their solution, you can immediately reduce integration complexities for punch-out catalogs, electronic purchase orders, invoices, and other B2B sales order automation documents to accelerate your business results. Thank you to Punch Out To Go. And we have an additional sponsor, Balance. Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers, offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. It's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com. Book a session, tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor, Balance. And Isaiah, back to you. I'm very excited about today's episode.
Yeah, it's been great to have these sponsors. Actually, Balance has come up on some new calls that I've been talking to folks about. So it's becoming more and more relevant. But yeah, so speaking of a potentially new sponsor, you guys are a great company in the B2B space, and your background is very heavily tied to B2B. So thank you, Andrew Johnson. Tell us about Shelf Aware and your background. I think could we call it kind of like the Amazon Go of B2B? Is that like the best way to?
That's probably the best way to summarize it. Yeah, an Amazon Go of B2B. So we're trying to create convenience store concepts on factory floors so that blue collar folks can do what they do best, which is manufacture quality goods quickly. And that's our goal. So yeah, you set me up for the sponsorship thing. It would be a pretty interesting sponsorship because when we got to talking beforehand, it's clear to me that we're pursuing very similar passions in a very similar marketplace and a very similar space with a very similar group of folks. So
we share the same problems. We share the same horror stories, and
yes, we do. But we're working, somewhat parallel. So I'm not in the Shelfware's not really in the e-commerce space. We're an alternative, I guess you could say, to e-commerce, where we're allowing suppliers to certainly work in a more digital way, but it's not an online purchasing experience. It's more of a collaboration between supplier and consumer that hinges around tracking consumers' consumption of goods. So my background in this space goes way back. I tell people that I have 36 years of experience, and they all like, "What? You're not that old." Well, you're right. I'm 36 years old, but I've been doing this my entire life. So, my entire life. My dad started a distribution company, industrial distributor of O-rings, gaskets, and seals in 1982, and I was born in 85. And so my entire existence has been wrapped up in this world. And he's a huge believer in child labor. So I spent a lot of time working in the family business.
We're going to quote you on that for the sponsorship.
I'd love to hear
child labor. We're pro child labor.
Yeah. Can you tell us, like, and I feel like this is just like a kind of an interesting anecdote for like B2B businesses. Like, you don't see people our age. You're like, I'm going to start an industrial supplies company. Like, you or, me or my generation, in our 30s, right? Like, we're not starting and like, so what gets someone like your dad to start that kind of company? And like, maybe what do you think that was happening back then? I feel like it's not happening now, right? Like
that is a great question and a really good observation. One I've spent some time thinking about because I, of course, have 3 children. So I work with, in a weird scenario now, with my 3 brother-in-laws. So only boy and 3 sisters married entrepreneurial men, and they all now work at this family business. So I do have a unique perspective on that question, but it's a great question. I think if you step back and look at the 10,000 foot view of the United States of America, we've encouraged generations of children like us to pursue degrees in liberal arts and not really concentrate or focus on the tangible skills that you really have to possess in the B2B marketplace.
Things that matter. Degree. So
things that make the world go round. Yeah. And that's one big reason that you don't see, I think, a lot of our generation on the, like, right out of the gate interested in pursuing careers in this space. The other reason, I think, is because the industrial space has done a poor job. It's been underinvested in. Some of it's not its fault. We just have not invested in our manufacturing sector like we should have in the last couple of decades, because we outsourced a lot of our manufacturing to other parts of the world. And because of that underinvestment, it's kind of archaic. The landscape in general in industrial is old and dusty, and it got left behind. What that means is from young people looking at it, it's really not very sexy.
Yes.
There's very little tech. There's very little things that they know and love involved in this space. And so if they want to pursue a job in, computer programming or IT, it is certainly not high on their list. Ooh,
it's really like, should I work at Google, or should I work at, like, this B2B? Yeah, Caterpillar is a good example, but even they're probably, they're at least a public company, but a lot of these B2B companies are like your dad, or these family-run companies that are still running like old ERPs and have like almost no tech, right? So
correct.
It's gonna, maybe, you might be able to recruit some folks to Caterpillar, but it's gonna be even harder if you're like these, small, mid-sized guys. So which kind of leads me to, I feel like this is the culmination of what we've been talking about for weeks now on this podcast, that culturally, and you brought this up to me before the podcast, there's almost going to be this divergence, right? Like, some of the B2B companies are going to be able to evolve. They're going to be able to figure out e-commerce. They're going to invest in it. They're going to get the talent. But a lot of them maybe, and maybe it's happening now, where they should say, maybe I'm not going to make it. And that leap is going to be too big of a leap to make.
Mm-hmm.
And they should start thinking about alternative pathways, because it's such a giant leap forward.
Correct.
With talent, outsourcing to things like Trellis, to buying platforms, data management, like all the things. It's so many different things that people underestimate, that you're talking, like, I think when you really put the numbers together, you're probably talking millions of dollars of like time and effort. Like, not just the platform, not just the Trellis costs, not just the design costs, like the data management, the integrations, the cultural leveling up. Like,
I think the cultural thing is probably the biggest hurdle. You can't buy culture. And if you have an industrial B2B company that doesn't have the culture to adopt e-commerce, like, it's just not going to happen overnight. That's a couple of years of top level management trying to push that culture down. But the problem we were talking about is and I think it's happening right now. I'm of the opinion that the jumping off point is behind us. You either have to have the pieces in place, and you should have jumped in with e-commerce years ago. If you haven't already, you're probably behind the 8 ball at this point. And you're looking at a really big uphill climb, and it's only going to be possible through help from companies like Trellis, that you could potentially make that leap to a solid e-commerce offering. And it's going to be through marketplace extensions like Amazon Business and Shopify. Those are going to be your shortcuts to market. But there's other things you can't buy, and that's company culture. It's SEO rankings. I think you'll be behind the eight ball on SEO and inbound lead rankings. And those are expensive and
just
time.
Digital
and frankly,
marketing. Digital marketing in general is hard and takes a lot of time. There's no
takes a culture. You have to have a lot of people that are okay with being on camera or being okay with putting out audio content,
writing content, writing descriptions.
Blogs are so much work. So all of that culture, if you don't have it, you're basically at this point where you either need to be very honest with yourself and your company and say, we're not there and we never will be. So your alternatives then are do something else better, like create another differentiator that's not e-commerce, and that's where Shelfware's at.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to jump in on is, I'm a little older, maybe I'm closer to your father's age, perhaps, but I started my first business in the 80s, and it was a very weird time. There were a lot of shakeups among traditional manufacturing, concerns, and a lot of distributors rose because the manufacturers were breaking up or couldn't figure out what to do any longer. Like they didn't know how much to invest in technology. So the first business I started was a printing business because there were printers who were basically just shutting down left and right with their traditional presses. And I, decided I would design using Macs, big innovation, and then jump ahead of those people. And it became something that lasted for years, and I kept evolving the business. But it's just like that. I always say instead of culture, it's almost mindset, right? Mm-hmm. You have to have the mindset first and build the culture second, right? You have to say, how do I innovate? What do I do to innovate? How do I stay ahead? And then you build the culture around it for those companies to succeed.
Yeah. So it's a long process, and it's where we find ourselves today. And then you throw COVID in the mix, and it makes for even murkier waters and what to do next. And you have stout competitors. We were talking about Amazon Business in our previous conversations, how they're creeping. You got a lot of B2C companies that are really good that are creeping further and further into the industrial space, and that's of a large concern.
And I've been saying this. I think it's actually easier for a B2C company that's a good B2C company selling, on Amazon and Shopify to move into B2B because they have the culture. Sure. All they need to do is, create tiered pricing, create a wholesale program, offer discounts, figure out free shipping, figure out like a couple of operational things. Now they can move into slightly larger average order value online. Maybe it's $1,000 online, or instead of selling $100, they can start to move into the thousands, and then they keep progressing from there. Whereas to your point, if you don't have the culture, it's a lot harder to have this super manual organization all of a sudden become, e-commerce first.
Yeah.
It's a much harder leap. Yeah.
And I've heard some pushback from, so I do some public speaking. I'm out there on the speaking circuit talking to industrial distributor executives all the time. And I have had some pushback when I air this opinion out from the stage. I'll have people come back and say, Amazon's not really a threat to us because we sell an engineered product. And of course, I come from an engineered product background. O-rings and gaskets are very highly engineered. There's lots of specifications. But honestly, I really believe that has bought the industrial market and some independent distributors. It has bought them some time, because they have been able to hide behind the intricacies and some of the black magic and specs involved and some of the regulatory barriers involved, and just any old B2C jumping into their B2B space. But it's only bought them a couple of years max, because the internet, all the information is out there. I mean, these B2Cs can figure it out. I mean, you can Google this stuff and self-teach yourself, not necessarily get certified necessarily, but you can, or even necessarily get the right sourcing, but you can certainly create alternatives pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I'm an investor in an AR, augmented reality kind of visual design startup, and they just released a new feature. They're very, very early stage, mostly focused on Shopify right now, but they've gone to BigCommerce, and I think they could start to move into industrial things like that. And the feature that they do 3D models very quickly. They're kind of like democratizing that, making it a little bit cheaper and easier to get up and running with 3D and AR. But they just launched a feature within the 3D model. you can link to pictures. So let's imagine a complex thing, right? Industrial thing. And then within that, you could link to the different parts of that and have it be this whole interactive thing. And they're bringing that cost down pretty dramatically and making it basically a plugin to e-commerce platforms.
Yeah.
So like all someone has to do is get that plugin, get the data, link to all the things, and then you could kind of like go online and basically like interact with a very complex engineered thing and all the different pieces of it. That stuff's like already here. It's going to take a little longer for like companies to get all their data online, but whoever's the first mover in that space is just going to dominate everyone.
And you know,
else,
there are a lot of people already circling in that space. I think we may have even talked about this in the podcast before. There's another company called Clixelate, and I think they started in the medical imaging space, right? Medical imaging, and they would teach people like, you know, different angles, like how to do surgeries in med school and whatever. But then they moved out of that, and now, for example, I think they have a partnership with Bosch, and they work around engines. So you can take a look at the engines, and so you're
different angles.
You're a mechanic, and what you do is you get the software from Clixelate. It goes all over the engine, and you literally tap on the screen. It's a tap and go, and it tells you what the part is and exactly, you know, where you get it and whatever. So it's a fascinating next step. It's exactly what you're saying, Isaiah. We're so close to just making it that easy for anyone to do what you're talking about.
And like you said, Andrew, it's just really the data. Like once the data gets online and it's more easily accessible, and there's going to be vendors that'll sell the data, and once more of that's, you know, ready to go,
the barrier's down.
The barrier's down, you know?
Yeah, game on. So we, as a family business, we hit our jumping off point in 2012. And it was really for us all about the data. My oldest brother-in-law, Adam, we had a good friend of ours who was a data architect, and he came into our small business just after hours and was helping us with an ERP adoption. So we were adopting a new ERP. And our good friend, the data architect, said, "You boys, the four of us, you would benefit greatly by doing the ERP data migration yourselves. Do not hire it out through the ERP company. You need to learn your data. You need to know your data intimately, and you need to do the ERP migration, importation of your own data, because after that process, you'll be much better off." And we listened to him, and he came in and helped us with the whole process. But that 2012 ERP adoption launched us down this path of incremental innovation, where after that process, our friend was right. We knew our data, we understood our data, we knew how our data drove every transaction, we knew how the data was organized, where it was stored, how to access it, how to manipulate it. And after that, my oldest brother-in-law, Adam, he started to learn how to manipulate the data using Microsoft SQL code, and then Visual Basics, and later Java, and all of those pieces came together. And he had a major in physical education. He had a master's degree in physical education, and he wanted to be a coach. Ended up coming to work for my dad, and he's got just the perfect mindset to be a computer programmer. But with the help of our friend who taught him some stuff, and then he learned the rest of it basically on YouTube. He'd Google how to do an inner join Microsoft SQL inner join table, and he'd find somebody doing it with a screen share.
That's how half the developers in the world pretty much learn development. Like, it's not like, you know, your college education helps, but most of the time you just Google stuff, Stack Overflow, you just learn on the job. But if you don't mind, what was the ERP you guys adopted in 2012? What was
in 2012 we went to Epicor Profit 21.
Okay.
Which is a really common distribution software. Yeah. And it runs on behind the scenes Microsoft SQL database. And most of our innovations I'm talking about were mostly done ODBC, so to connect direct to our database. And we wrote like our own analytics package to look at our own, you could say like our vitals of our company, and deliver the vitals to our company management in, report formats or triggered formats. We did all that through Microsoft SQL outside of our ERP system. Ended up creating our own kind of wireless warehouse system because we weren't happy with what Profit 21 offered. And so we did that by using a mobile app, Android mobile app, as a user interface that then, spoke directly to our ODBC, to our ERP system on the back end. So it's all It was all like a really long multi-year process from 2012 to 2015. And then somewhere around that time too, we launched our own e-commerce experience. And that was where we came to the realization of we can't do this. We had a great, the company website is oringsales.com. And if we would have had the forethought to turn that into a online outlet for all things O-rings, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, we'd be a totally different company today. But we didn't, and we waited way too long. So we ended up jumping in with Amazon Marketplace in like 2015, leveraging our supply chain to sell B2C products as opposed to B2B products through Amazon. And it's about $1 million in revenue.
Yeah.
On an annual
Wow.
basis now.
So I'm curious, have you guys looked at, I don't know, what version are you guys on Profit 21?
I don't even know what version.
Okay. They actually built an integration to Magento. Works okay. We have a customer on it. So you guys might want to explore that. It's pretty fully integrated. I'm not sure like they're going to charge you and you have to pay for all the pain of that, but
yeah. So you're probably going to tell me, and this is probably, it was a foolish choice perhaps, but we started kind of Frankensteining Profit 21 so much that we kind of came to a head with Epicore's support staff, and they didn't really want to support some of the features we had bolted on and built ourselves. And so we got mad and we said, fine, well, we're done paying for support. So we jettisoned our support of our.
Wow. I mean,
that's a whole other episode.
That's another episode. The question is, would the integration they built even still work for you? I don't know. Like
probably not.
Probably not. But it's worth looking into.
That's a whole nother episode of what not to do.
I'm a big believer in build versus buy. If it's good, right? Like if you run into issues, trying to build your own integration to Magento would probably be really expensive. So if you can buy theirs and it works, great.
Yeah.
It works for one of our customers. I'm not saying it'll work for you guys, but anyways.
The takeaway from why I said that is don't get in a fight with your main ERP provider. That's a bad idea. Honestly, it's a terrible idea.
That's why you're focused on shelfware. So tell us about.
Yeah, right. So then, good segue. So in 2015, since we knew we weren't going to create this epic, and we're kind of too late to the party to create this epic B2B e-com solution around oringsales.com. We had started this Amazon Marketplace thing to cater to some B2C products and just leverage our supply chain. And it was growing nicely. But we knew as an industrial distributor, like if we really wanted to grow our business significantly, we still needed a differentiator, and e-commerce wasn't going to be it because we'd waited too long. So,
and you guys felt you waited too long in like 2016, 2017. So
like,
that's crazy because most people are like, they don't think they're too late now.
Yeah. And the reason we thought that was because we'd done a lot of our own homework and had looked around. We've been around the O-ring marketplace for a long time, and it is quite the niche. And that's what you'll find in a lot of these industrial distribution product verticals. They're very, very niche. So everybody knows everybody. And we knew everybody in the O-ring marketplace, and we knew this one guy, Marty, had done a great job from an e-com perspective of capturing an e-com marketplace for O-rings. And he already had it all set up, and it was great. And we loved him, and he's a great guy, and he seems to run a tight ship. So we're like, we're never gonna beat him. Like we can't catch up.
He's already like ranking #1 for O-ring gasket.
Dude, he was really early on Google AdWords. His story is also fascinating. If you ever want to have another guest in the O-ring space.
please introduce us.
I will introduce you because his story is fascinating. He went from being like a paintball. He was running a paintball course, and they sold a lot of O-rings for paintball guns. And then something happened, and the paintball course was going under, and so they just like tripled down on e-commerce for O-rings. And
that's amazing.
He's got a fascinating story, but we knew we weren't going to catch up with him. And so we launched Shelfaware in 2015. It's a vendor managed inventory service, and it's a way for industrial distribution to set themselves apart. If you don't have e-commerce, you can at least offer your customers a highly collaborative way to do business that will drive value into their organization by eliminating the need for them to cut you purchase orders. So we're automating the supply chain process, the purchase order process, by driving replenishment of industrial products based on pure consumption at the factory floor. So when the products leave the inventory area, more are on the way, basically in real time. And so we launched that in 15 as a beta. My brother again wrote all the software internally. It's mostly like Visual Basics was the interface, and then there's just Microsoft SQL code in the back end. We tied it directly to Profit 21 and actually used Profit 21 as our basically random number generator to generate a lot of the transaction data in the background. And launched it in 15. Picked up like some huge chunks of business by advertising a software as a service, basically. So we'd go to large manufacturers, consumers of O-rings and gaskets who historically had, one or two purchasing people who were basically running a reverse auction. They would bid out parts of their industrial O-ring supply chain, and they had a lot of spend, maybe $1 million, and they'd split it between 10 or 15 different industrial O-ring suppliers that had the brand names they wanted. But we'd walk in and say, hey, we'll run your whole supply chain autonomously. We promise we run it really, really lean, and we'll never stock you out our product because we have real-time visibility on what's on your shelf. And that sales pitch worked over and over again. And this is another funny moment of realization when you do this kind of stuff. All of a sudden, you don't really stop a whole lot when you're like in a fast sprint to innovate and look around. And we didn't. We hardly came up for air. But at some point, something just smacks you in the face. And this would have been in like 2017. We had picked up in the last couple of years using Shelf-Aware, picked up huge chunks of business, $1 million at a time.
Yeah.
And my dad was
big
huge,
sales,
huge contracts. And so and just for perspective, when I started working for my dad when all my brother-in-laws and I started working together in 2012, we were like 3.5 million in revenue. And
this
by
is the distribution company?
The O-ring distribution company is running about 3.5 million in revenue. By the time we got done with launching Shelf-Aware and picking up new business, we were knocking on the door like 10 or probably 9 or 10, maybe 11 million. And so fast-paced growth in the industrial distribution space means huge inventory onboarding. So you pick up $1 million customer, oftentimes we'd have to outlay $250,000 in inventory costs to support the physical product supply chain.
Yeah.
And
you don't get that $1 million instantly, right? So
right, it all kind of spools up, and it's based on product sales, and you can't sell something you don't have. And so we'd have to go out and buy. We'd pick up $1 million supply chain contract, and we'd have to go out and buy $250,000 of inventory. So those big tickets started smacking us in the face. We're like, man, okay, two things. Number one, obviously the service is very, very valuable, and there's a huge demand for it in the industrial marketplace. And number two, we can't keep growing like this as an O-ring distributor because we're broke. Like my brothers and I were broke as a joke. Our entire paychecks and distribution money was going right back to the shelf on inventory purchases. And so that's when we, in 2017, decided to launch it as, and this is also really weird, but we decided to launch it as a software as a service, which is kind of rare in the industrial marketplace. It's more of a consumer type of structure, but it's a software, hardware as a service. We license the system and equip independent suppliers to go run it in their own product vertical with their own customers, wherever they want to go.
And how many people are using it now? Like what's the...
Yeah, so we have, we have 6 industrial distributors that are licensed and running around the country selling it. It's installed at dozens of factories across the country. Some of our installations are pretty crazy because like our very first adopter, it's a gearbox manufacturer in Kansas City. They have applied the Shelf-Aware product to 4 of their inbound suppliers. So they're actually, it's one installation, but it's 4 supply chains feeding the one consumer. So it's kind of interesting. It tends to just spider out inside these large facilities, and they start to get other industrial suppliers to use and adopt Shelf-Aware, and we can just push it to the next supplier, to the next product vertical. And they're adding their 5th. They're in the process of adding their 5th right now. So they'd be using Shelf-Aware to manage and automate 5 separate supply chains from 5 independent suppliers who don't see each other's data, except the consumer can see everybody.
So you've mentioned that it's RFID, right? So there are companies I'm aware of that are more in the consumer space that, for example, that are doing fashion, beauty, high-end jewelry, this sort of thing, where individual items or small packages are tracked worldwide, and so they're watching them on the container ships and they know exactly where things are. Is there a parallel or a very close parallel to that on the B2B side?
Yeah, sort of. It kind of depends on the product vertical that we're talking about. So we got started with this whole thing in the O-ring vertical. So O-rings are really, really inexpensive. So we launched Shelf-Aware with the idea of tracking package quantities as opposed to eaches. But now that we're expanding it to other product verticals, if you sell a product, like high-end retail that costs hundreds of dollars or even thousands of dollars, then we can just track it per each. So it just depends on what product vertical you're going to, but it's basically an RFID tag that's embedded in product packaging. So it's a peel and stick label that has a really cheap UHF RFID tag behind it. And then the hardware sets we deploy, we intentionally chose like all the off-the-shelf hardware. As practitioners, we knew it had to be accessible and inexpensive for industrial distributors to adopt.
Like what's an example of that?
We chose like everything we use from a hardware standpoint is Zebra, which is just a big household name from a hardware provider. And then all the Zebra hardware we use, some of it's completely untouched. We don't molest it at all, but like the reader, we actually install an applet that runs on the Java firmware of Zebra. So it's very stable. We've kind of just leveraged their existing firmware to run an embedded piece of software.
So you've kind of built on top of these other things. Makes sense. You don't need to reinvent the wheel in those areas. And then like you said, I mean, it makes sense that like a lot of these products in this industry or just in B2B in general, it's like it's not an each, it's like a box of 50 or like you're gonna RFID like a box, probably not each individual ring within a box. Like so actually this is just I'm just trying to understand myself. How do they even like manage that? Do they wait until the box is completely gone, or if they use half the box, or
good question. It just depends on how lean they want to run. So if they want to track partial consumption and count it as this is consumed, they can check out a box off. They can check it out of the system, but continue to pick out of it until it's empty. That'll get another package en route on resupply to them from their supplier. Or they can wait until it's empty and then check it out. And that just means they're going to run a little leaner, a little tighter ship. Yeah.
Gotcha. So it's just, these are just little things they can figure out.
Yeah. Nuances of the system. It's practical, it's scalable. You can run it how you really want it. It does have lots of flexibility on how granular you want to get. And it just depends honestly on the financials of it. Like how valuable is the product you're tracking? How important is it not to lose one? If they're O-rings that cost 0.000 pennies, then who cares? Like, just track them by the thousands. And, if you lose a couple hundred, big deal. It's like 50 cents. So yeah, it's a real lightweight system. And we just started deploying it, licensing it and deploying it to other product verticals. And we're kind of just having fun with wherever it goes. It's applicable in any B2B supply chain. And at the end of the day, I mean, I feel like you have to do something really, really well in this space, or you're going to get acquired. Those are your options. Do something that's unique and intrinsically valuable, like run a really stout e-commerce outlet, or run a differentiator like Shelf-Aware, or sell to a big guy. Because finding growth, generational growth, organic growth in this industry by doing nothing it's over.
Or just the old way of like, hey, we'll call you up, or we'll do like the old way of doing sales is just, it's not going to get the growth that you need. And then
because the demographics are changing. I mean, I think you have to cater to millennials to some degree. They're just not built that way, not programmed that way.
Yeah, and it's not even just the millennials. It's not even just millennials. I mean, that's a conversation I had with other folks recently, because everyone's adopted, basically every technology in their day-to-day lives. And as I was saying earlier on, I'm an older guy, but I do everything on my phone. And if I can do something on my phone that wasn't able to before, I'm going to do it on my phone, right? So it's just the way, things are done today. That's why I have 100 apps, right? So if I'm doing something that's B2B and it's available to me to do, like, scan a QR code or tap something, I'm just going to do it. I'm not going to bother with a fax machine and dialing a phone or whatever else I had to do in the past. Right?
Yeah.
And culturally, we're getting conditioned all towards that.
Yeah. Automation, right? Like, it's so frustrating to have to like call up customer service and then like maybe get a hold of someone and then try and fit. Like, it's just not a great process if you can go online, buy something, automate. So I think the word e-commerce, like, we really need to get away from the word e-commerce. Just, it's really like, what is it? It's making it, as our motto at Trellis is making commerce simple. It's making,
Integrated
transaction.
supply.
Yeah, integrated supply, automation. It's really automation, right? So like, if you're not automating and simplifying the process, whether that's e-commerce, like the traditional, go online and buy it, or some sort of advanced integrations with your customers, or shelf aware so that they can go in and get it and it's kind of autonomous. Yeah, you don't really have much of a value proposition. You're basically just a warehouse with a bunch of inventory, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And then at that point, it's like, well, if that's all your value, then you probably should sell it before people realize that that's all you're worth.
Yeah. I think each year you hang on it, your value as a company would probably, I think, is going down.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you about another business I heard of recently that has a related angle to you, and I'm just kind of wondering what you think of it. So people who do construction, right, and people who do facilities maintenance now will tag everything, right? Everything is tagged in a facility, so that, for example, they're scanning or something, or they're aware of a particular bar or an outlet or a pipe or what have you. And if it needs maintenance, then they know exactly which one and exactly where it came from, because it's going to a database. And then, if a repair is being done by a facilities maintenance company, they are able to track it instantly. There's no thought process involved. Are you involved in that kind of tagging as well? Or is that something you guys thought about? Or
no, we're not involved in that type of tagging. And it's something that we looked at when we built Shelf Aware. Most solutions in the vendor managed inventory space focused on a prior technology, barcode scanning.
Sure.
And so when we decided we were going to go with RFID as opposed to barcodes for our primary data collector, we did look at lots of other RFID systems. And I went to several different RFID shows, and we picked up on where that market was at. And that's asset tracking is basically what you're describing.
Yeah.
That has been RFID's focus for the last decade. And there are some incredible systems out there in our industry, O-rings and fittings and hose. Parker Hannifin's a giant supplier to the whole industry. And Parker Hannifin has some really interesting apps based around RFID that would allow you to like deconstruct a piece of mobile equipment, and then you can actually RFID tag these hoses, or RFID tag. It'll tell you exactly what the hose is made of. It's 32 foot in length, and it has a JIC adapter on one end and a Boss adapter, or a MPT fitting on the other. And so those systems are phenomenal. I think they're going to become more and more prolific. And whether it's a QR code or an RFID tag, there's going to be some sort of data point that you can access information on whatever it is you're looking at.
So how are you guys selling this, right? Like, no one really, you're kind of like a new category, right? Like, no one's like Googling, automated replenishment software for B2B, like, ever. I mean, probably not very many. So like, you guys kind of almost have to go out there. You got like, how are you guys finding new customers and getting the name out there?
Yeah.
Besides being on this podcast and things like that.
This is obviously one avenue. The frank answer is we, in 2017, when we decided to launch Shelfware as an independent company and start licensing to other industrial distributors, we had no plan, and we did a very poor job of selling it. I am in charge of obviously selling Shelfware, and I really kicked myself for not putting myself out there sooner. I had a pretty good black book of contacts in our little niche, and I thought I could just start there. It was a pathetic start because it's such a numbers game. You have to find industrial distributors who have, like we talked about, the mindset and culture to adopt something, try something new. So it's about timing. It's about personalities. It's about opportunities that are in front of them. So I should have opened up my funnel much, much, much sooner. And how we opened that funnel up was a big debate internally. Okay, since people aren't looking for products like this because it's basically a new way of doing things, how do you find them? So what we've really landed on is three avenues. One is public speaking. So I mentioned that earlier. I started to put myself out there as a personality that would be willing to get on stage and tell the family business story and use the family business story to inspire and educate other companies to do something similar. Get out there, get your hands messy, innovate. You can do this.
Yeah.
So that was one avenue, was motivational educational speaking in a trade association format or a business conference format. COVID kind of put a damper on that. That stunk. The other format is this online format. So I use LinkedIn,
digital marketing,
digital marketing, podcasting, to try and raise awareness for what we're doing and get the word out there. And then the old school approach, which is working pretty well, is just a ground and pound email marketing campaign.
Yeah.
So people listening may have gotten emails from a company called Shelfware. It's still tough though, because you're hitting people, no matter what format we do, you're hitting people with a brand new concept, a new approach to how you're going to do B2B commerce. And they have a hard time wrapping their heads around it. You are up against their former understanding. And so they tend to relate it to systems they already know. And so we've tried to make analogies around a vending machine, because people know industrial vending from companies like Fastenal. They're like, oh, is it like a vending machine? I'm like, well, I mean, in essence, yeah, you're turning a pallet rack, a shelving, floor stock into a virtual vending machine. I mean, we're going to know when you walk away with something much like you would out of a vending machine, but we just don't have the constraints of vending. So we've tried in creative ways to explain and educate folks about how we're doing and how we're doing stuff differently in a simple format, but it is hard. It's a long form to get them off of.
You're creating a new category, which is always tough, right? That's
Are you U.S. only, North America only, or all over the world at this point?
So we're currently just based in the U.S. We could go anywhere in the world because the internet can go anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And I think, by using Zebra, that's allowed us we can get hard access to hardware anywhere either. So we've definitely explored a couple opportunities in Europe. We looked early on at an opportunity in China. Decided not to do the China one because we're scared about just losing control of everything in China. So yeah, the simple answer is right now it's in the US, but we can go anywhere.
So let's talk about, we're kind of getting towards the end here. What is that cultural signal to you? You seem to have a really good pulse on this because you have your family business. You're at the conferences, you see these huge ranges, and we talked about like there's the Grangers of the world, and Granger invested millions in e-commerce like 10, 15 years ago. Because I actually know some of the guys that built some of that stuff. They're like our competitors that we looked up to when I started the company, and they were like way ahead of us, and they were getting those contracts, right? We've grown up a little bit, but those Grangers, those guys have already spent millions on SAP Hybris or whatever, Magento, and they're like super far along. Like if you look at Granger, I looked on LinkedIn, they have like e-commerce analytics specialists. Like they have all of these like specialized people, and it's pretty sophisticated for B2B. And then, you go down to more of the mid-level guys, and then you have, your mom and pop shops, like basically what your family is doing. So I know there's no exact rule, right? Like, and I don't think everyone should take the decision personally and figure it out for themselves. But like, what kind of things would you say are the indicators that it's like, hey, you still have time, you can, level up, go all in on e-commerce, spend more money, figure out e-commerce, or hey, maybe take a step back and spend, invest on selling to Amazon Marketplace or Shelfware, or going like kind of a different route because it's probably going to be too hard for you to build your own. There's a big difference between building your own e-commerce and selling through other channels, right? So
yeah, that process of, and I don't want to, I'm not trying to confuse anybody, but the company name is Shelfware, but I was going to say the process of self-awareness as a small business is very important. You have to be really honest with your ownership and management and your company culture, and do a self-assessment. You walk in and you're going to look at basically key attributes of a distributor and what makes them digital or not. And if you're an analog distributor, meaning you don't have a strong handle on your data, you don't have anybody on payroll that can manipulate your data, you don't have any integration experience with other platforms or third parties, then I don't think you're wired or adept to pursue an e-com solution. You better look elsewhere. I do think that I've said this before, that small business is the new big business. And a lot of that is because of the extremely tangible hardware and software that's just sitting out there from third parties that you can grab a hold of and run really fast. And as a small company, you're much more nimble. You can make quick pivots and changes if you decide to do so. Just as long as your management and your ownership is willing to get their personal hands dirty in the process as well, because I think that's what it takes on a small to medium sized business. Is executives have to have the mindset, and they have to be prepared to jump in the trenches with everybody else to make these quick changes and to adopt new platforms and systems. But I teach that small companies like our family business can do incredible things in just the course of a couple of years, and we can do those things because the landscape is such that we can move quickly. You have the cloud environment now with the Google Cloud. Amazon's got AWS.
AWS,
yeah.
We got a lot of stuff on AWS.
Microsoft Azure. It's just these
Yeah.
environments that are like kind of pre-made. They're set up for you to succeed quickly. You don't have to build all the pieces of your back end and front end like you did before. We've leveraged mobile apps, which are extremely convenient and super fast to create, like great value-added service for user interfaces quickly, and they're easy to maintain over a long term. And I teach and talk about using pieces of hardware that are also like set up for you to manipulate and customize, like Raspberry Pis and other mini computers that are ready to just plug in, so you can make an IoT device quickly. That's how we did our smart counting scale. Was we threw a Raspberry Pi into an old stupid counting scale, made it smart instantly. So I don't think it's too late for small businesses to act like a big business, but if you're not already down the digital road, you have a lot of catching up to do, and it's not impossible. It's just a big undertaking, and it starts at the top.
Yeah, I think like what you said is really important about how you need someone internally that understands this, that can manage third parties. Like you can't just outsource everything to Trellis. Like I've gotten way more careful about who we work with at Trellis, because I'm like, well, who's going to be managing? Like, if we can't just like fix all their problems, right? We can augment. We can make maybe your guys. Let's use you an example. Like, we could probably make you guys better developers by helping your developers, right? But like there's going to be things that you guys need to do. You got, like you said, you need to know the data really well. Like we're not masters of your data, and so I mean, I was talking to a $1 billion distributor, and they're trying to level up, and they have all these people trying to figure out. They don't have one single developer, no one technical that actually knows how all this stuff works. So we're poking so many holes in all their problems on the technical side. And it's like, they don't have one, like, I think they do have some technical people, but they're maybe too far deep into the ERP, the back office side, and not really thinking about the front facing e-commerce. You know what I mean? It's just a different world in some ways. So it's, you're right. The small business can move forward, but like that cultural investment, you have to be really honest about, like, what is that? Who are the people that you need? And I mean, are those salaries you can afford, or?
Yeah, I think we got really lucky. We're blessed, or however you want to say it, that my brother-in-laws and I were willing to do what we did, which was get our hands messy, not just sit back and collect a check. And then we also got lucky because from a family business perspective, it's rare to have a founder of a company who's going to be willing to let go of the reins as much as my dad did.
Wow. Yeah.
And there was certainly some friction like early on, but you have to understand, like, we took his business and just started tearing it apart. It was a very visceral, like emotional. I mean, we had I think we had 10 or 11 different objectives that we laid out on a whiteboard for him, and he freaked out. And we had this, we call it Armageddon now, but we had this moment where we almost all quit because he was unwilling to make these 10 changes we thought were necessary to bring this company into the 21st century. So it's I just keep kind of reiterating this. If you don't have like complete buy-in from the people at the top that own that company and that manage that company, if they're not completely 100% on board, committed with their own sweat, blood, and tears and emotions to make this quick change, it's not going to go well. And so for Trellis to be successful as a third party, you have to have a willing dance partner who knows their company's data intimately. They have the capacity and desire to optimize. High levels of internal efficiencies, of course, are helpful, and that comes through an innovation process that they probably started before even engaging with
Yeah, and
Trellis.
honestly, I think it's funny that you say that. Like, the more success we're having, it's like I almost feel like if we can't talk to the leadership team, we probably shouldn't work with them. Like, if they're
Forget
like,
it.
oh, just talk to the marketing guy or the, some lower level people. If we're not talking to the ownership and they're not serious about it, it's just like it's not going to work.
I don't think so. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think so. I think that was a secret to our success, and how we were able to do it so quickly was you had
Yeah, I
ownership.
mean, I'll echo that. I mean, I've had a long-ish career at this point, and I was in one family business where the older generation was handing it off to the younger generation, and I was actually brought in to be the peacekeeper, because everyone was fighting with each other and it was crazy and it was awful, and I was like the boss of two brothers, which was just like the worst possible decision. They should have never done that. I had to leave. It was just like mayhem, and it was a disaster, right? Another family business that, the older generation was handing it to the younger, and it was fantastic. I mean, they understood that they had to move forward. They understood they had to make tough decisions. They weren't going to do things in the old way. And that business today is 100 and something years old, and it's thriving, and it's great to see that, right? I mean, some of those businesses made it, they actually made it, and they just realized you had to keep moving and thinking. So I had a question kind of related to that. What are you thinking about? It's not the next generation, because that's like way too soon to ask that of you guys, but what are you thinking you're looking toward for the next 3 years, 5 years? What are you thinking about for your business? Like, just capturing more of the US market, getting into other markets, what sort of things are you thinking?
So my brothers and I now at this point we're pretty sure that the future for independent suppliers is only going to be bright to the extent that we collaborate with other product vertical suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I mean by that is, Isaiah mentioned Grainger earlier. Grainger, Fastenal, MSC, Worth, these giants have gotten so giant, so big that for us little guys to survive and thrive, and well, not just survive, but to thrive, we need to band together. And it's going to be through collaborative kind of marketplace approaches where you have maybe a selection of independent niche suppliers, family businesses like you referenced with generations of experience in particular product verticals that work together to provide some of the industry's largest consumers, because there's certainly tons of consolidation on the consumer side of things too, with the giant complexity of product they demand and their inbound supply chain, but with the individual expertise. So that's what Shelfware is driving towards, is that collective approach where we're trying to onboard multiple product vertical suppliers and have them work together to collectively supply some of the industry's larger consumers everything they need in a one-stop omni-channel that's digitized. So I think that's the future. And what that means for my brothers that still run the O-Ring company is they're going to have to be open to collaboration, and people are going to have to be less scared of networking and sharing data. And you certainly can't keep your head down. You need to get out there and mix it up with other companies if we're gonna thrive.
More partnerships, almost more of this
Strategic partnerships.
Yeah.
I only have one other question for you that has nothing to do with the business. So were you named after Lincoln's vice president?
I was not. I don't believe I was. A very common name, yes, and not a great president either.
No, I when I see names that match the names of somewhat famous people, I've asked people, and one time I got President Tyler's descendant. So I was like, oh my God, it was right. Only one time ever has it happened. So just thought I'd throw it out there.
I guess it just had a good ring to it. So they just
exactly. It does have a great ring to it.
Well, it's amazing to see what you guys are doing. I think it's awesome to see someone, bringing SaaS. They said a modern technology to kind of these older school businesses. I mean, there are obviously a lot of SaaS B2B tech out there, but really bringing it to like the physical side. You're kind of like bringing it.
Yeah, there's a hardware component.
Yeah.
Or SHASH. You got to put an H in there. SHAAS. SHASH.
It's IoT. It was IoT SaaS. Isn't it Internet of Things? Yeah, that's like the cool, right? The consumer tech. So you see that a lot nowadays with these like new e-commerce companies that are IoT, but it's mostly consumer. It's like a little device, and then you get a little app that goes with it. So it makes a lot of sense that this should be coming to be more to B2B. Like why are we not more IoT and B2B, right? So, well, I guess, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to ask one other quick question. Are RFID tags, are they sustainable? Are they recyclable? I mean, that's sort of something I've wondered, because I've seen them for years, but I just don't know.
Yeah, we couldn't have done what we've done without the RFID industry making huge strides when it comes to the cost of the tags, the ease to manufacture the tags, and certainly the sustainability of the tags. They're getting much more simple, and there are talks on the horizon of a chipless tag. So it'd be an RFID tag that's chipless,
Cool.
which would be a great innovation, drive the cost of the tag down and make it much more sustainable. You don't need all the energy that goes into making chips for an RFID approach. The tags we're using today are really inexpensive. So the inlay we have is about $0.05 for the inlay, and that gets cheaper as you go up in volumes and cheaper as time goes by. So it used to be 50 cents. So we've come a long way from where we used to be. And really the other thing that's driven the innovation in the RFID space is just ease to encode. The Zebra printers that we're using now, and there's other printers like Printronix and brands like that, and Avery that do a good job, not just printing and encoding these smart labels, but then verifying that they encoded correctly, so you don't have any concerns. And that's what you really had to have. So yeah, it's a fascinating industry. It's an old industry. It's been around for old tech, and been around for a long time, and you're starting to see it pop up more and more in the consumer space from retail. You talked about people tracking clothing and gift items. It's very popular in the retail marketplace. So I think it is sustainable, and it's definitely scalable, and it's going to continue to get even more appetizing to commodity-based product tracking.
So I'm going to ask you one last question, and because and I think I'm really glad I even found out that you exist. I think the future of commerce is like basically all digitally enabled. So it's, e-commerce online, you're either, buying it yourself, very easy, one-click checkout, these fast shipping times, this basically like moving to the Uber experience for almost everything, or the Amazon Go. I still think that Amazon Go, the shelf aware, has a really important place to play in the future, because it is convenient to be able to go somewhere physically and pick it out, but it's not convenient to wait in line. To me, like waiting in line is so archaic. You have self-checkout, but like we gotta be getting closer to this pretty autonomous level where it's like, really, you shouldn't be waiting online, or you shouldn't be waiting on the phone, and you shouldn't be waiting on email to buy things anymore. Do you get where I'm saying? And when do you think that kind of like autonomous delivery of services and goods is? You think we're 3 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out? I mean, it's going to be a while for like everything to move in that direction, but
whatever, that's a hard one. Whatever time frame you put on it in the industrial marketplace, my experience says double it. So
yeah, double. Maybe consumer, it's like 5 years, and
we'll invite you back 10. In 2030.
Yeah. So I think that's a tough one in the industrial space. And if you flip it to the consumer space, it's a much safer guess. I would say in the consumer space, you're just a year or two away from that. And I say that with confidence because Amazon Go is actually rebranded and licensing the system to independent convenience store owners. And so if you happen to own a gas station and you don't want to have clerks, in there checking,
I was wondering
out.
that. I was wondering that.
Completely rebranded. And I should know the branding. I think it's called Just Go.
Oh. I should start selling that.
Well, you should buy a convenience store.
I know people already selling it, actually. So it's pretty great.
But I mean, it's probably only a matter of time that Shopify POS, and then Shopify POS Go. They'll probably white label it, and then you can have it all integrated. It's got to be soon, right?
With Amazon Go and the Just Go system, I think I might be butchering that. I don't know what they private brand or white labeled it to, but it's a little more agnostic. It'll go into any convenience store. They install their series of Amazon Go really relies on vision systems, so they install a series of cameras in your convenience store as it sits today. They retrofit it, walk away. and you're online, and consumers then walk in your front door of your, your own Quickie Mart in your local town, and you can walk in, grab what you need, and leave. So I think
love
it's
your
just around the
Simpsons
corner.
reference.
I wonder if it might even
Quickie Mart,
reduce
yeah.
theft because it like forces people to pay. Like, you have these like crazy stories of like people just like stealing everything from Walgreens and they have to close.
Not anymore.
Yeah, it's
Now
like,
to
well,
get in
now
the
you just
store-
paid for everything. It's all on your credit card.
Yeah,
You have like a
scan your-
5,000.
That's right. The consumer version, you scan your credit card, and that's how it identifies you. And you walk around, and you can't really steal anything because there's 100 cameras watching every move you make.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time I shopped in Amazon Go was already, I shopped at a trade show like 6 or 7 years ago. And then they opened up one in New York City across from Macy's Herald Square probably 4 years ago. I mean, so it's been years of that technology out in the world. So I'm so glad that finally they're getting it out and spreading it even more.
Yeah, and RFID adoption is going to help, and retailers are adopting passive RFIDs that are getting embedded in their clothing and consumer goods, like at an alarming rate. And they're doing it for inventory tracking purposes, but soon enough, they'll be able to combine that with the automated POS systems to also add another layer of like security to, hey, this person actually pulled these products off the shelf. The cart contains 15 items.
I just bought this from Marshalls, and like it's always frustrating. Like they can have like a long line. I'm like, I know what I want. Like, can I just go?
Yeah, we're there. We're there for retail. You're gonna see like really quick adoption towards automated POS systems. For the industrial space, it's going to take a while longer, mainly because the industrial marketplace just got so left behind in the infrastructure race. So lots of manufacturers don't have the infrastructure that they need to adopt these systems. So we'll get there.
Well, this was amazing. I really appreciate this, Andrew. We'll have to have you back. Let's have you back, and then you can tell us your updated prediction, and we'll see.
Yeah, sure. That would be great. I'd love to come back and talk to you guys. It's a fascinating world we live in. It's very chaotic, and there's a bright future for the U.S. manufacturing space as we start to reshore some of the stuff we outsourced.
Yes,
when I was a kid. So it's coming back. So we're here at a good time. Yeah, it is amazing.
Thanks for another great episode of the Hard Truth About B2B eCommerce.
You are welcome. Thank you for having me.
Have a good weekend.
You too.
Bye, guys.